Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Desotel, and I'm here with my co-host, Jessica Montoya Coggins. Hello, Jessica.
Hey guys.
Yeah, and so we are really on the end of the current legislative session. There's only a couple days left. Sine Die, which is the official end, is Monday, the 31st. And so essentially what's happening now is all the bills have been passed. Essentially, they're going to pass. And the final couple days here, they're going to be essentially voting on the conference committee reports, which I think we sort of discussed on the last show, which is basically the House passes a version of the bill, the Senate passes their version of the same bill with different amendments. And so each side has to essentially appoint a couple of members to come together at the same table and go through these bills and essentially, come up with just one version of it, which then gets sent back to each chamber where they have to essentially make a final approval. Um, and so that's kind of where we are now. And so if the bills haven't passed yet, they're probably not going to pass unless they're, of course, put on a special call a call of a special session by the governor, which we do know is going to happen in the fall because of redistricting, as we've mentioned. And the governor also recently added another piece of legislation to that call, which is going to be the allocation of the $19 billion in stimulus funds from the federal government from the pandemic. So that was a big point of contention with members. But other than that, we've talked about quite a few bills, pretty bad ones have already passed. And I know,
Yeah, I think and just chatting, and I know that you've got a whole circle of folks that that work at the Capitol, but it does feel, I'm a little worried for some folks' health. I don't know if they've been eating or exercising on a regular schedule right now, but this session has been pretty appalling. I think I had low expectations, and it was worse than I thought it would be.
yeah, I mean, this is sort of a perennial thing that like everybody says, oh boy, this session was worse than the last. And basically, the closer Democrats get to sort of retaking the majority, that has been the case, that every session they come up with something new that is worse than what we did last time. And, we saw this, of course, with the 6-week abortion ban, the ban to actually outlaw abortion completely if SCOTUS does overturn Roe v. Wade, permitless carry. I mean, these are all things that they've talked about in previous sessions, but they either didn't offer this exact version or it's just couldn't pass. And so, this stuff isn't coming just out of thin air. This is part of a long-term play and agenda of the most extreme members of their caucus. And they're coming up on a primary for another statewide election. And so some of this stuff was just priority because of that. And so, we've talked about, you mentioned you had written previously about, I think it was HB 3979, which was the school censorship bill that Republicans have coined the phrase critical race theory, or at least adopted that phrase to make it mean something that it's not. I don't know if you have any comments on that, or if you had seen what version of that bill has passed, or if you could tell folks what that does.
Sure, sure. So this is essentially a bill that would limit what is discussed in civics and social studies curriculum at public schools. So a lot of gender diversity, discussions of race that would be very curtailed. A lot of current events would not be allowed. So yes, there's this phrase that we've been hearing a lot just around the country about critical race theory. And it's, the American Federation of Teachers of Texas, they're pretty adamant that there is no real public school where that is being taught. Which, I mean, there, in the 70s, it was a sort of an examination of judicial issues that I think were very were not looked at in a way. The discrepancy between sentencing for cocaine versus crack cocaine, these type of things that actually I think have come up in discussions of criminal justice reform. But Texas Republicans were very motivated to pass this bill. There was a lot of discussion about a book that had allegedly been recommended to a ISD in Highland Park, which is a wealthy, predominantly white enclave in Dallas. So it's a picture book about racism. I retweeted a video on Twitter that I thought was really interesting. It was an exchange between State Senator Hughes and Boris Miles. And so Miles was asking these questions about the picture book. So it turns out the Republican senator had not even read it. Did not even know that the author was actually a white woman. And again, this is a pretty, it's a picture book that's trying to combat racism. It's not
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some of the discussion on the floor about this on the Senate side, and they were questioning Brian Hughes about this. And I believe it was State Senator Sarah Eckhart who was essentially asking him, would this count as, would this be allowed? Would that be allowed? And one of the things she asked was essentially just saying, teaching about slavery, and that's, and that, women didn't have these rights, men and certain people didn't have these other rights. And essentially, his answer was, well, as long as you don't teach that it was the fault of white men. And it's like, well, okay, well, who was it, and so that's kind of what this gets down to, is they spend so much time on the front end trying to say, there are no racial connections to any of the things that they're doing. The voter suppression, the gun issue, the policing issue. There are no issues of race at all. It's just these people happen to be black, or these other things. But now what they're doing is taking it to the schools so that people don't even learn about these issues from a context of anybody else's perspective, or that there may have been 100 years ago structural issues that the government was in charge of and literally excluded certain people based on their race. I mean, even in Austin, we're kind of going through some of this stuff. The 1928 master plan in Austin was specifically telling Black people that they had to move to the other side of town. And that wasn't even 100 years ago in Austin, supposedly a progressive place. And so all across the state and the country, obviously, this has been an issue. And they are trying to essentially erase history. And I find it incredible, because when we try to remove, say, Confederate statues because of what they represent, they say, oh no, you're trying to erase history, or and literally in this case, they are trying to take it out of the history books.
Mm-hmm. And this is a big thing, and I think it's gotten a lot of national attention. Texas has it's sort of leads the country in manufacturing textbooks, so we're kind of not new to some of these discussions about what should be taught in schools. But this is just a very, again, it's very broadly worded. I know that, there were a lot of, during this debate in the House, to your point about the questions of like, are we even going to learn if, some of the Texas quote unquote founding fathers were slave owners? Apparently not. Representative Anchia tried to make sure that if we're talking about the January 6th and January 6th, we refer to it as insurrection. I guess that's not going to happen. That's a current event. I don't even know how long that stretches. My grandmother was a longtime public school teacher. She taught English as a second language. And in the 90s, a lot of her students were refugees from Bosnia. And does that, no, would we not talk about that in that context? So it's just, this is a bill also that's like very, very much opposed by pretty much several ISDs. I know our Dallas ISD is very opposed to it. A bunch of historians signed off on a letter saying they did not like this. American Federation of Teachers of Texas. So this is not popular.
Yeah. And there's the way these things are tied together It's so interesting because they're using the same tactics over and over. And so I feel like changing these rules on what's taught is essentially just trying to cover their tracks for what they've been doing for years and years and years. And as you mentioned with criminal justice reform, there's an obvious connection. There has to be some reason there's these giant disparities between people of color their numbers in prison, and it's certainly tied to the way that they've been treated from the very beginning, and this sort of a continuation of from slavery to Jim Crow to redlining of who can live in what neighborhoods to separate but equal to, I mean, just over and over and over again, and every step of the way those entire generations were being held back, and the accumulation of wealth over generations denied completely, and so it's just another inconvenient truth. And and you can just tie it to the things that they're doing today, like the voter suppression stuff in SB 7, which is currently in conference committee, which we fully expect to pass. But one of the most atrocious parts of it is that it limits the number of voting polling locations in places where that have the highest number of people of color, and this is all very intentional. And so if we can draw a through line from the beginning of history, our own history, to today, I think that is the sort of the trail that they're trying to erase. And you just look at the major issues from guns and the permitless carry, the voter suppression bill, to even some of the symbolic things that they did, like making, I saw Governor Abbott tweet just a couple of days ago that he made the whatever some six shooter. It was the first six shooter ever made, and it was made it by a Texan, and it was the most popular gun during the Mexican American War.
Yeah.
So literally, they're like, they developed this gun to literally shoot Mexicans, and this is our state gun now. Like, so just everything that they do is tied to a very core um, agenda that they have. And you look at the pictures that they've taken recently as they passed these bills, the abortion bill. I mean, it's almost 100% white, and they won't say anything about that, or if you comment on that, you're the one who's being racist because you see color or something. But there's certainly a through line with all these agenda items that seem to all sort of lead to the same goal and
Yeah, no,
result.
that photo when Abbott was signing Senate Bill 8 was I talk about The Handmaid's Tale a lot, but that was very hard not to see. Again, this is a bill that will predominantly affect poor women, most likely women of color, who are now going to potentially have to go out of state. That costs a lot of money to a place like New Mexico or to Colorado or
Mm-hmm.
but we will see on that one. It is very likely. I would assume a lawsuit would be brought up to challenge that, and it does not take effect until September 1st. But again, the Supreme Court is sort of that um, ultimate court, and I don't know if we can necessarily rely on that.
Right. I mean,
Here,
and I just wanted to show this photograph because, I mean, this isn't a totally uncommon image, right, that we're seeing with this type of legislation, and it just gives you an idea. Like, if you really cared about Texas and the people who live here and what they think and believe, the only people who you have supporting your bill, it won't just look like this. And if it was a Democrat bill, you would absolutely see some people that look like this, but it won't be all of them. It'll be a diverse group of men and women from different backgrounds and different regions, and it'll look like Texas. But this does not look like Texas.
It does not. And again, I also have to point out that a lot of these people are, the quote unquote pro-life folks who, are celebrating this week about permitless carry, are also cheering on when Abbott prohibited local municipalities from doing mask mandates. COVID-19 has killed 50,000 Texans. This is I don't know why, um, you know, that doesn't apparently make it onto the pro-life agenda, but you know.
Right. Yeah. It's not a pro living agenda, right? It's just a really good use of rhetoric that's worked for them, and there's no reason that, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So it continues to be very good in terms of recruitment for them. And yeah, I think it's going to be up to us, progressives, to sort of redefine that and say what it really means, and not be afraid to do that. But using the frames, and we've talked about this before with other issues, they're very good at framing these issues in a way that is compelling to their base, and really truly to people who aren't paying attention at all, because they always try to frame everything as like, oh, well, this is just common sense, or this is just, you sort of like a no-brainer, and they try to put everything into even complex and complicated issues into a bumper sticker that is just a good branding exercise. And so that is what they're good at. And even when it completely conflicts with their own claimed values, like we mentioned with the police funding issue, they're consistently in every other issue saying that we need to reduce spending, we need to reduce government spending. Well, they have a bill that is one of their most popular bills that they've championed this whole session to defund cities that defund the police. And they talk about Austin, which Austin has not defunded the police. In fact, Austin had one of the highest, uh, biggest budgets relative to the rest of the budget and the size of the population to any other city in Texas. And in fact, this police budget in Austin's about 40% of the entire city budget, 40%. And they want to increase that, just because it fits with their quote unquote back the blue narrative that they've been pushing, that Democrats are running these crime ridden cities, and really untrue based on the real data if you look at the data. But again, that's not what they're looking at.
And several state police departments were extremely opposed to permitless carry. I mean,
Hmm.
just recently in sort of a suburb of Dallas, Flower Mound, there were three officers that were critically injured. They were, I think, trying to they were going into a home. Someone was, I guess, a danger to themselves, had a firearm, and they were in critical condition after that. And so you heard from several sheriffs and folks that just they did not want to see permitless carry because it's a threat to their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the other day, I saw that I mean, just maybe a couple days ago, Greg Abbott was tweeting about an incident where someone was shot, and they didn't the police had it took 16 minutes for them to get to this person or whatever. And he tried to say, well, that was because we defunded the police, and so therefore they couldn't get to this guy when he was shot. But he had no context for why the person was shot. And this is the same person who, like you said, is pushing permitless carry and taking away also the training requirements and background. I mean, there's still technically background checked for some gun purchases, but not all of them. And one of the biggest issues that advocates for gun safety will tell you is that a lot of these incidents are domestic disputes where someone has a background of abuse and ends up, hurting or unfortunately sometimes killing their family members, the people they live with, or their partners. And to me, the way I read this situation from the police report, that's what it seemed like had happened in this situation. So, on one hand, they're saying we need everybody needs to own a gun. On the other hand, they're saying we need to increase police funding so they can protect us. And the narrative, there is no common narrative or through point to this in a way that is very logical, right? And so, because if before Black Lives Matter and they were all of a sudden big police advocates, they would tell you that the reason they have the Second Amendment is to protect them from the government. It's not so they can go hunting and sporting. It's so that if they ever needed to rise up against the government, that they could do that. And then now here they are. they want to increase, the funding for the government to be able to come in and with their guns and do whatever. So it's just they're really good at sort of putting their finger on the pulse of what's going to get their base motivated, and we've got to realize that we're not going to influence their base, and we've got to figure out a better strategy. I think a calm strategy to say what we stand for and present data and facts. And it's hard because the research shows that data and facts don't always change people's minds, unfortunately. And so we really got to lean on the people who or our base and the people who are sort of nonpartisan and would rely on the facts and um, to really help start to change the overall narrative that we're stuck in right now.
If there is one thing about the COVID-19 pandemic that has just really manifested for me, it is that for a large percentage of this country and of this state, just even stuff that you thought would not be sort of controversial, they can be controversial.
Yeah,
And
it doesn't take
figures,
much.
and
They they send the bat signal out, and then it's like everybody's on message, and it just flows all the way down. And if Trump says it, or if some other leader says it, it's already gospel, and it's in the lexicon, and that's how they feel about it. And another really telling thing about this is very contradictory to the back to blue narrative, but Republicans in Congress are opposing the investigation, supposedly bipartisan investigation into the death of a Capitol police officer on January 6th.
it was a major flip flop for John Cornyn, who in February, had tweeted that he was, in support of this commission, and then now is opposed to it. And this is very sad to me. I believe one of the mother of one of the officers who was killed was meeting with folks on Capitol Hill, and she's
Mm-hmm.
still, I think, obviously grieving the loss of her child, but this was important for her to do. And I'm sorry that she has to be put in this position of trying to lobby something that should not be a
Yeah.
controversial thing, but she is, and I'm really grateful to her for that. But yeah, it's super, Ted Cruz goes on all the time about how, Democrats want to defund the police, and here he is, he doesn't
Yeah,
care.
they won't even support an investigation into why a Capitol police officer was murdered, and it was Officer Sicknick's mother who was on Capitol Hill, and I saw a partial interview with her, and she said that not even half of the Republicans agreed to even meet with her or talk to her, and so how they can say that they backed the blue when this guy was just trampled, and they don't even want to look into it, they won't even look at it. It's extremely awful. And
Well, I
so,
think in Ted Cruz's case, he very much remembers where he was right before
I mean,
the
he's responsible for some of this, and I think that's ultimately we know that the accountability issue is what they're really running from right now. But speaking of accountability, Trump is being investigated. Looks like criminally now. There's a grand jury, and his good buddy Ken Paxton, who has been indicted for over 6 years now, finally got a ruling today or recently in the last day or so from the Harris County Court, which is to send his case back to Collin County, which is where he's from. It was, of course, originally moved out of Collin County because they thought it'd be a conflict because he's from there. He's a statewide elected official. His wife is also a senator from that area, and so the thought was, it's too much conflict in his favor to have a fair trial. But it's going back to Collin County. I think that's ultimately a good thing that this is moving forward regardless, because it's starting to pile up on him, and so we need to get this moving. Like whatever's going to happen, like let's go through the motions, because he is planning on running for reelection as attorney general, and we know that him and George P. Bush, who is apparently his top rival, to a sort of a signal that he is interested in running for that position, both were meeting with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump also recently said himself that he is going to make an endorsement in that race. and then he'll announce something soon. So, we see George P, sucking up to Trump in statements publicly. And he's supposedly going to make his own announcement on June 2nd, which I believe is next Wednesday. So we'll be looking out for that.
Yeah, that will be very interesting. I'm curious to kind of see what sort of the Republican donor class will make of this. I know that a lot of people were trying to prod George P. Bush into running against Ken Paxton, but Paxton has a lot of allies. He and if I find I just don't ever see Trump not endorsing him after all the stuff that Paxton did. He brought a Supreme Court case trying to just toss out the electoral college votes of several states. I mean, if that isn't undying loyalty, he also obviously was at the Capitol the day of the
Hmm.
insurrection, along with
Yeah.
Angela Paxton,
On
um,
stage, even. Yeah.
on the
With them.
stage.
Yeah.
So we will see. There's potential primaries sort of everywhere. We know that Abbott has a couple candidates right now. It's still possible Sid Miller jumps in on that.
I certainly hope so. I mean, wouldn't it be great? I mean, because at the end of the day, we get rid of at least one of them, right? Like, I mean, if they're running against each other. So, I mean, I just encourage all of them to run for governor or whatever it is they want to run for. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's starting to shape up a little bit. And one of the other things we've also been watching was Dan Patrick, because we thought he might potentially run for governor. And you can't ever trust Dan Patrick or anything that he says. And so this trying to pick up signals from him is a little tough. But I think we have a better idea now that it looks like he probably wants to stay where he is and run for reelection, because he got the Trump endorsement that he will run again, because Sid Miller was signaling that he might either run for, as you said, for governor or potentially a lieutenant governor. And then we get the Trump endorsement. But Dan Patrick is continuing to push that hardcore, hard right agenda. We saw that just the other day when it looked like a lot of his priority legislation would just simply die because it would run out of time. And he called on Governor Abbott to immediately call a special session for June. And he asked, some of the things he wanted to put on there were the SB 29, which is the transgender sports bill, which we've talked about before. NCAA and lots of other companies and are against that, as anyone should be. But this is the kind of stuff that Dan Patrick is preoccupied with, because we know back in 2017, he's the one who was also pushing the bathroom bill, which was incredibly unpopular. And this was one of these cultural things that he was pushing. And then he did the same thing. The time ran out in the regular session. He asked Abbott to put it on the special session call. Abbott did do that. And Abbott got every one of his priority pieces of legislation passed through on the special session, but the bathroom bill did not pass. And so, so Abbott's moved on now to transgender children, from adults in the bathrooms, which didn't pass. And I guess, you know,
and
and
the world didn't end. Nothing
yes,
bad
thank you.
came from it. There's been nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, whatever happened to that? Oh, okay, I
I
guess we're
know we were
moving
told
on.
to just be
Yeah.
chaos, everything.
Yeah.
But
So, yeah.
this is, several states have, so this just allows any child to participate in a sports league that's consistent with their identity. And, California has had this on the books for years. No, again, no.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I mean, and the irony is that the one really well-known transgender athlete, Caitlyn Jenner, is saying that is agreeing with this while also running for governor of California. So it's, you know,
She, she is an idiot. I'm just
yeah, exactly.
full of.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum. An idiot is still an idiot, and that person is definitely an idiot. And so, and there's a Trump connection there too for folks that don't know. Brad Parscale, who ran Trump's digital in the first campaign and was briefly his campaign manager, has also been helping Caitlyn Jenner run for governor. So, the couple of other things that Dan Patrick asked to put on the special session call was the end to taxpayer funded lobbying, which we've mentioned before as one of those really good issues for Republicans because it sounds really good. And so if you don't know anything about anything and somebody says, should the government be having a bunch of lobbyists on their payroll, then be like, no, why is the government paying for lobbyists? And then you look at everything that they're doing to totally kill local control at the state level, and you say, oh yeah, maybe it'd be nice for a city to have some representatives there to say, hey, this is actually a really bad bill. You're really, hurting our ability to deal with the issues, that are unique to our area, to our region, to our economy, to our population. So that's one of the big ones for them. That actually does poll really well. And then the other one is the social media censorship, which was sort of a national issue that they brought to the state level. Republicans and conservatives have been saying that they've been censored and canceled. And meanwhile, of course, they're canceling actual history in the history books. But in terms of their ability to, and of course, we're hearing this on the biggest platforms and bully pulpits that are around, members of Congress, you know, TV talk show hosts. These are the people saying that they've been canceled, right? People with $1 million contracts to talk on television. And so, this is just more culture war BS that they're pushing. And fortunately, they did not make the cut in this session. And I can see the governor putting it on a special, but so far he has not indicated that he's going to do that.
Right. We will see about that. And in terms of SB 29, I think the anti-trans sports bill, that was sort of revived, but was revived by a Democrat. We sort of discussed what Harold Dunn did there, but this was also a chance for a lot of our Democratic lawmakers to really, advocate for to oppose this legislation, and it was good to see a lot of activists and allies were at the Capitol. So when that midnight deadline passed, there was obviously a celebration that at least this one bad bill did not make it. And a lot of actually the other anti-trans bills also met the same fate. And again, this is the NCAA is opposed to this. I think every major sports league is as well. So it's just one of those things that, like, the fact that Dan Patrick wants to revive this, it's unpopular, not just sort of throughout the state, but would have a huge financial impact and in a very bad way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they don't seem to care about that, though. We've talked about that in the past. As much as they talk about, government spending or whatever, they've been very terrible stewards of the budget and our tax dollars, because when you look at all the money that was our money that they've just chose to sit on, the governor is still sitting on billions of dollars in federal money that hasn't been distributed for things, that was literally, it's Texans' money, and he's not distributing it. The also stopping the additional unemployment benefits, which obviously hurts people, and not expanding Medicaid, which is just leaving money on the table that we paid into because we pay federal income taxes, and this is money that has been allocated to Texas that they
over $250 million.
I mean, yeah, we're not talking about chump change. Exactly right. And so it's really, upsetting. And one thing that we didn't mention about George P., because, honestly, for somebody who's got such an easy job and who has claimed that it's not even a real, important job, he certainly is not very good at it. And, just recently, every time he's in the news, it's about something bad. I mean, how do you mess up the Alamo and you're in Texas? Like, all the conservatives were mad at him over the way he handled the reimagination of the Alamo situation. And then the latest thing is that he did not allocate any money to Harris County or Houston for Harvey relief funds. So over $1 billion were distributed, and Harris County and Houston got $0 in Harvey relief fund. And so he tried to blame the Biden administration. He blamed Houston and Harris County leaders. It turns out that Harvey didn't happen under Biden. Harvey happened under Trump, and so the rules for distribution were clearly done under the Trump administration. And so now, he thought he's just going to own the libs the same way they're doing with the voter bills trying to suppress the vote in the Houston Harris County area. Just another way to punish people with their own money. And so in this case, the blowback was quite severe for him. And so he has now applied for $750 million on behalf of Harris County to go directly to Houston and Harris County. But he was only shamed into doing that. And that's his job as the land commissioner. How often do we hear about the land commissioner in the state of Texas? Not that often. But when we do,
it's because you really messed up.
He's screwed up. So do we want this guy as our attorney general, or do we want the indicted, guy who's also under FBI investigation to be our attorney general? I mean, we got 30 million people, and this is the best they can come up with. So I don't know.
We will see. We know that there's currently one Democrat in the race, and I assume there'll be some more. I assume in the next couple of weeks we'll be getting a lot of announcements on these, but it'll be interesting. I know someone who knows George P. pretty well, so I guess this is I guess he sees a path forward on this. So
I mean, yeah, I think he sees how Paxton is weak, but is he weak with the base, right? That's the question, and I don't know that he is.
Ken Paxton, when he first ran, he was probably considered the underdog when he ran against a guy from North Texas, Dan Branch.
Mm-hmm.
I've had like this weird a couple of stories I've done where Dan Branch just keeps coming back in.
Yeah.
So he was a state rep, and I guess maybe a little bit more on the moderate side, and
yeah.
Probably would have been assumed to have the upper hand over Paxton when he ran, and then Paxton defeated him.
Yeah, I think in the old days, like 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, a sort of like pre the 2010 sort of like hardcore Tea Party sort of resurgence, Branch was sort of what they would consider the elite, sort of in the elite Republican category of the old, just good old boy Republican, in the club. And then all of a sudden it became, outsiders. We need these outsiders, and Republicans started kind of attacking their own party leaders and things like that. And then ultimately out of that we get people like Trump. And so the fact that Trump has been and Paxton have been tied at the hip, I think that doesn't bode very well for George P. Bush, which I don't know if I think. I did say, I think on the last episode, that I can't wait to hear what Trump's nickname is going to be for George P. Did you hear he actually has one now? He's come up with one.
I just briefly read the Political article about his so why don't you
he calls him My Bush. Like, really?
We shall see.
How belittling. I mean, like Little Marco, like he calls Marco Rubio Little Marco because he actually is trying to insult him, but he calls George P. My Bush, as in the other ones are not, like his dad and his grandfather. Like, golly, how awful. Yeah,
well, it'll be interesting. I don't know how much pull even his uncle still kind of has in our Texas Republican Party, who was a former president.
Oh yeah, no, I know.
So we'll see. The big thing that I'm planning to do this weekend is, I know that there was some supplemental footage from Borat 2 that was out, and in the trailer, Sid Miller was with Borat, and that was in the trailer, but it wasn't in the final movie. So maybe this
it's like a director's cut or something they're releasing.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, that's all the news I have, but I did want to say happy belated birthday. And you did something very special on your birthday. You did a half marathon and you completed it. Yes. You're still here. Great job.
Yes. It well, I was just a little nervous because I don't know about y'all, but we've been having like an insane amount of rain, and so
Hmm.
the race was able to be done. They did have to sort of redo a little bit of the route that we were on, but it was just really cool. And there's a lot of volunteers that were there that helped with our water stations that were just cheering throughout. So if you'd asked me like 2 years ago if I would have ever done a half marathon, I would have not said that, like that's crazy. But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, same to me because I had one run and yeah, it was crazy, and I probably won't do it again, at least not foreseeable future.
but these are
Um,
the types of things that are coming back now, and it's
yeah,
not. We also talked about the ACL, and the Texas Book Festival is coming up again. I'm very.
yeah.
It's just these things that we're kind of coming back to some level of normalcy.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's great. I've been seeing invitations and flyers for events and stuff happening, so it's really great. I'm really excited about it. I am still little weird about going places without my mask. I like literally want to tell every person I like come, in close contact with, like, hey, I'm fully vaccinated. So
Yeah.
I was thinking about
Yeah,
getting.
it is a bit weird. I just was at the grocery store right before we recorded, and it, it was about like 50% now. Is sort of where
But
it's.
you still wear your mask when
I
you're.
do. I don't know.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, you know what? I'm thinking about, those little name tags that say hello and you write your name in. I'm thinking about getting one, like a permanent one that just says hello, I'm vaxxed. And just, you can get them with the magnet backs on them so you can reuse them.
But
And instead of wearing my
I
mask, I
didn't
could
have a
just say that.
cold for a year and a half. My allergies have been severely reduced. So I don't
That's, you
know.
know what? Yeah. Actually, my wife said the same thing, because she has bad allergies too. She's like, I might just keep wearing my mask anyway. So, I think there's gonna be a lot of people that do that. And, yeah, I mean, it's certainly fine with me. But they're finally starting to realize the potential long-term effects of COVID, which I think is another thing we're going to have to revisit, because while Republicans are doing these sort of victory dances because they opened up faster and the spread is down, one of the things they celebrated was the death rate. Oh, well, not that many people are dying, but it's not always about dying. There's a lot in between living a high quality of life and being dead. I mean, we're talking like long term, injury to your internal organs, that and the scarring that could deteriorate over time, is what doctors are saying now could potentially happen to people that were exposed.
Yeah. So one of the people that I talked with when I was training for the half marathon, she'd run about 2 years ago, and she's probably 32 or something, and she had a case of COVID, and she's still not quite her breathing ability is
Mm.
not what it was, and I
Yeah.
mean, so she can't really do long distances anymore like she used to, and
Yeah.
and
I mean,
in North
that's
in Dallas, they opened up a clinic to sort of study some of those long term side effects, and it is definitely so. This is another thing. If y'all
insightful.
have not gotten your vaccines, go
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing all kinds of programs now where if you have colleagues or a group of people more than five, or they'll come to you now.
Yeah,
I'm hearing certain counties are doing that, but it's available, and if you want
yeah,
it, you can call your local drugstore. They're basically a walk-in now everywhere. You can just
yeah,
walk in and
yeah.
get it.
And
So
for 12 and up too. I just
yeah,
at my grandfather's house now. His neighbors, their kids just got a shot, the first shot last week. So
awesome.
good.
Well, all right. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening, and a special thanks to our Patreons and to others out there who want to continue enjoying and helping to support the progressive journalism that we do at Texas Signal. Just go to texassignal.com and you'll see the Patreon at the top right. Um, and check in, with us often. We're always covering the latest, a lot of really good stuff up on the website right now, and you may see all the different versions of content we have all over Instagram, lots of videos and quote graphics and different formats for the content. And it's just really important that you join in the effort to help spread that word, and not just be an active listener, but we really are trying to do something here when it comes to making Texas a better place for everybody that lives here. So we appreciate your support and you joining the conversation. And until next time, we'll see you later, y'all.
Bye, guys.